Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Water Online Show. You are in the flow with Travis Kennedy and my esteemed colleague, Kevin Westerling. Kevin, welcome back to the show. It's good to be back with all of our listeners, all of our viewers. We have quite a guest and quite a show stacked up for us today, don't we?
We do. So welcome, listeners and viewers, and we're very excited to get this thing going.
Absolutely. And today, our very special guest is none other than Bill Becker. He is the vice president of Hazen and Sawyer. I'm going to give him a chance to introduce himself right now. But before I do, just to give our viewers and our listeners an idea as to what it is we're going to be talking about today. The topic today, Kevin, is something we've heard a lot about. What is it?
Privatization.
Privatization of municipalities. Right. So that seems,
of course, water. That's what we talk about.
It is, right? It's not going to be privatization of, private sector bubblegum factories or anything like that. But yeah, this seems to be a growing trend in the market, and we want to make sure that we explore it from a subject matter expert that we know will have a lot to say and give us a lot of input and background and information. So, Bill, why don't you let our viewers and our listeners know a little bit about who you are and how you interact with water and wastewater utilities in the role that you're in.
Okay. I am Bill Becker. I've been a water guy, I guess, for about 40 years now. I'm a vice president at Hazen and Sawyer. I was the corporate water practice leader for Hazen for a number of years, and I just turned that role over to Eric Rosenfeld, who will go on to do a much better job than I did.
Oh, we don't know about that, but yeah, we're happy to hear that he's in the role because he's very, very good at his job, as I'm sure you were.
He will be. In my role at Hazen, I've had the opportunity to work with some of the largest utilities in the country, from New York to LA to some very small utilities. And so I've seen a lot of different water quality issues, water management issues that occur across the country.
So thanks again for joining us, Bill. We asked you here today, not only for because of your Hazen and Sawyer experience, but because you formerly worked with American Water, which is the largest private utility with, plants all across the country. So to start, could you describe your role there and compare it to how you deal with water and wastewater utilities now, and just kind of from a high level and how they do things, the difference between private and public water utilities?
Sure. My role at Hazen or at American was back in the late 80s. I worked there for 5 years. I think American Water is a special place. As you said, it operates in 24 different states. There's hundreds of systems that it operates, serves more than 14 million people. As such, there's economies of scale that American has that most public utilities don't. I don't know that the differences are so much between public and private as they are on a scale basis. And I'll come back to that again, maybe a little bit later, but American, structure-wise, there's a corporate office, so they have, they can centralize things like accounting and finance, engineering, water quality, all of that. So when they operate in different plants in each state, each state operates as its own independent company, but there's a tie back to the corporate, so they can draw on that experience, whereas most utilities just don't have that scale to be able to do that.
That certainly brings to light some of the differences in how a larger scale utility might operate. I want to talk specifically about privatization versus public utilities. So is there differences in the way that say a privately held utility would operate versus a public utility, and maybe talk to some of the advantages that one may have over the other, if there is one? And I don't know if there is one or not, but it'd be interesting to get your opinion on how the operations differ.
Yeah. I don't think there's a blanket answer for that, quite frankly. There are some extraordinarily well-run public utilities of all types. And by public, that includes municipally owned systems, cities, counties, to authorities. So there's a scale there, spectrum of utilities that are extraordinarily well-run. And then there's the other end of that scale, you have the Jackson, Mississippis and the Flint, Michigans, right? So it does depend on the individual system. I think a lot of cases privatization is definitely the way to go. Certainly for the the medium-sized utilities where the political management isn't really skilled enough to operate a major infrastructure system.
So when you say skilled, just to follow up on that, so I'm just curious in terms of if there's one advantage of one over the other, is there an advantage that, say, a publicly held utility might operate under, and would there be also a benefit from a privatization standpoint? Like, is there one benefit for each that you can maybe point to?
I would say the benefit of a private utility, well, I think there's a few.
Mhm.
One is they have the expertise in-house to
Yeah, that
solve
helps.
to solve a lot of their issues. They also, the way the private utilities are funded,
Hmm.
they're, if there's a capital improvement that's needed, they can go to the Public Service Commission, Public Utility Commission, varies by different states, and request a rate increase for that. And that's outside of the normal politics that mayors and city councils get embroiled in. And they're
That makes
able to
sense.
earn a return on that investment. So,
That makes a lot of sense.
in a one regard, I think private utilities are better able to keep system up to date and running and not have the aging infrastructure issues that many other cities seem to have. So that's an advantage on the private side. The public side, if it's a large enough system and I guess managed and governed in a way, what comes to mind to me is like a Fairfax County Water Authority. They're able to maintain their system, keep it up to speed, install advanced technologies because that's what the authority decides is needed. And they're able to raise the capital and the rates to do that.
Okay, yeah, and that's great from a great description from an operational structural standpoint, and that would naturally benefit customers. But I want to focus solely on the customer side and their experience. Is there any what's the advantage from a customer standpoint from being served by a public utility? And bear in mind that we're going to ask you what's the advantage from a private. So it's kind of like a comparison, but like from a public utility standpoint, what's good from the customer side of things?
Speaking as a customer.
Yeah.
Yeah, as a customer, I would say from a public perspective, the advantage it depends where you are. If you're sitting in Jackson, Mississippi or Flint, Michigan, I'm not sure there is an advantage of being served by the public there, right? Because they totally mismanaged those systems for many,
Right.
many, many years. Took money from the water utility, used it for other things, and ended up in the positions that they were in. On the other hand, if you're a customer of a well-run authority or municipal system, then all the water quality needs are met, the capital infrastructure is up to date, and your rates are perhaps arguably a little less than they might be from a private system, but I'm not sure that's always the case. In fact, I know it's not always the case.
Yeah, is there not like an old school mentality though that it just should be a publicly run thing, like a comfort level based on that, as opposed to having shareholders and private interest? Does the consumer ever even think that way? You
I don't
think?
think the average consumer does, right? I mean, you're both power companies, electric companies, cable, all those are privately owned, and people
Mm.
don't seem to have an issue with that.
That's a great point. Yeah, I don't want to get away from that point. I don't mean to interrupt you at all, Bill, but that's a great point. I mean, there's every other aspect of what we get inside our home, whether it's power, electric, gas, cable, whatever, are run by private companies. Interesting point to make. I didn't quite go there, and I didn't even think of that being a customer of a publicly owned utility. I didn't even think of that. But I'm sorry, Bill. Go ahead.
I guess I think one of the issues, to me, the big issue in the water industry in the U.S. is the fragmentation, right? There's 50,000 utilities of all sizes scattered across the country. And politics has entered into many of those. I remember several years ago when mayors changed in New York City, that the edict came down, you can't raise water rates. And so for 2 straight years, there was no ability to raise water rates. And so you can't operate any business, anything, you can't operate your household without an increase in revenue just to keep up with inflation.
Sure.
So the politics is a problem. There's many places I've been involved with where mayors or city councils have said, no, we're not gonna build this. And because no politician really wants to vote to raise taxes or raise rates for things that people can't see. They'd much rather spend the money on a park or something that helps them get reelected. And that's a problem with municipally run systems. And I hear the argument, we want local control over everything, but local control often means buying water from one utility, selling it to your residents, and marking it up. And then that money gets used should be just the water system. In many cases, that money finds its way to other coffers and cities.
Interesting. That's an interesting point. I want to stay on the customer experience for just a second. So we talked somewhat about the customer experience of a public utility. Pros and cons from a customer's experience related specifically to having a privately owned utility servicing them.
I've lived in places where I've got water from both, and personally, I haven't seen a difference.
Interesting.
And, day to day, I've lived in good communities, so the water came on my tap when I turned it on. It met the regulations. It didn't smell funny, taste funny.
Always good. First sign indicator if it smells funny.
Always good.
So, Bill, would you say that privatization is becoming more common these days? And if so, what factors do you think are contributing to that?
I think it has, and I think it will continue to going forward as municipalities have more pressures, budgetary pressures and others, just to, manage populations and schools and other city functions. The EPA just last week, I think, issued a draft rulemaking called the Water System Restructuring Assessment Rule that gives power to states and other public water systems to, take over or restructure failing water systems in the U.S. So those with repeated water quality violations, it makes sense to regionalize those or get those together to cut down on the violations and the fragmentation that occurs. And I think that's a benefit that American has and its customers actually have. They're able to equalize rates across the state in many cases. So when they take over a system that's otherwise failing, they can invest the capital that's needed and then spread the cost of that throughout the entire rate base in the state so that it's not unaffordable for the particular utility that needs that investment.
One of the topics that I hear that comes up related to what we're discussing here, especially concerning a privately run utility, is the fact that if you're talking about a publicly run utility, if they raise rates, then it's expected that those additional funds are going to be put towards some kind of improvement, pipeline replacement, filters, disinfection, whatever the case is, whatever's needed. Some of the concern, and I don't know if it's warranted or not, from privately held and run utility is that they are technically, because they are a private company, they technically are for profit. So they can essentially raise rates to increase revenue for a for-profit company and not necessarily put all of that money from the increased rates back into the systems themselves. So is that fear justified? And what could you say to help maybe alleviate some of those fears?
Well, it's a little outside of my area of expertise and experience, but what I do understand is that in order to raise rates, the private utility has to go before the Public Utilities Commission.
Interesting. Good.
And there's rate cases, and there's courts, and there's people that'll testify on both sides of that argument. The water company wants to raise rates. They have their experts. The public advocate side doesn't. They want to keep rates as low as possible.
Yep.
And so they'll challenge that.
Duke it out. A little bit.
Like everything else, it seems it's getting duked out in the courts.
Yeah. So I think as long as there's effective oversight, I think that really isn't that big of a concern. But you can go to the UK and kind of look at maybe some things that have gone really wrong. They regionalized their systems back in the 70s and 80s, and then they went from public regional systems. There were only 11 water utilities in the entire country of the UK.
That's it.
And
Wow.
and they're organized on a watershed basis. I think there's a lot right there, but the oversight board, at least if you read the headlines in the newspapers, got a little too cozy with the water companies. And, face it, when big hedge funds come in and they privatize something and take it over, they're looking to make money.
Of course.
There's no doubt about it. I would say I don't lump American or, Middlesex, the ones that operate in this country, I don't lump those into the same bucket so much. But a lot of assets were stripped after they sold to the private companies. And so there needs to be the proper oversight for that type of privatization to really make sense.
Right. How about let's talk from a technology standpoint. So we at Water Online, we're always promoting innovations and trying to get utilities to be more innovative and install new technologies. Have you noticed in your experience any difference between the way private companies or private water utilities are willing to take on new technologies versus publicly held utilities?
Yeah, I think again, at American, first of all, a lot of great research has come out of American over the last 20, 30 years.
Very true. Yeah.
Our understanding of pathogens and treatment has increased dramatically from a lot of the research that came out of it.
Agreed.
Likewise, there's a lot of large utilities. New York City DEP has done a lot of great innovative research over the years. HRSD is doing a SWIFT project now, right? That there's a lot of great research and innovations that are coming out of that right now. And there's several others you can point to. So I think it's a scaling issue again. If you're large enough, you can do the research and adapt it. As far as actually putting those technologies in, I think the American waters are better able to do that because they can rigorously test stuff, on a smaller utility. And then if it works, they can rapidly scale that up and implement it to their other utilities. From a municipal perspective, it's harder to take that leap of faith of being the first one to try something because, it's public money. And you have to make sure it's going to work before you install it. I think what could really be, I sit on a lot of these types of panels at Columbia University's America with Water Initiative thing. And it's interesting because you hear Wall Street talk about, there's billions of dollars in need in the water industry. We have billions of dollars. How can we make this all work? And
just happen to have billions.
Yeah.
What shall I do with it?
And one, they want a high rate of return, which isn't consistent with the water industry. But I think a lot of times these companies could maybe say, we have a new technology, we'll install it for free, operate it for a year or two. If it meets all the required, come up with a contract, if it meets all the requirements in that contract, then the utility will buy it for X dollars. That would protect the utility and also get the technology installed more. So I think both step up to the plate there.
Smart.
Before we let you go, I want to turn our attention towards the future, just for a quick minute, if we could. So, with your expertise and your knowledge, and I know you're not a prognosticator of what's going to happen in the future, but because none of us are. But how do you see the public versus private utility ownership playing out in the future? Whether that be over the next, let's do this. Let's break it down over the next year and over the next 3 years.
I guess over the next year, I don't know that a lot will change because nothing changes that quickly in the water industry.
Very true. That is a perfect answer for this market. In a year, I don't know if a lot's going to change, but over 3 years, we may see this.
Yeah, over 3 years, I think you'll see some moves towards consolidation.
Okay.
Some of that consolidation will be private utilities acquiring municipally run systems. I also think there will be some consolidation amongst municipal systems where some neighboring systems will take over other neighboring systems or they'll merge
neighboring
together.
towns, right? That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I could totally see that happening. That seems like in the industry that we're in, that's the most logical next step. And like Bill said, which we agree with here, nothing moves at a light speed of light pace here in the water market. But that makes a lot of sense to me. You could see if you're next to it, if you're a smaller town and you're next to a larger town, that you could see them possibly merging together. And then I think you'll slowly see this privatization pick up a little bit at various areas across the country where there's already a foothold.
In fact, I think it's happening. People are familiar with George Hawkins, who used to run DC Water. He has his own company now called Moonshot Missions, and their whole mission is to, consolidate, help each other out, get these local utilities working together, these municipalities to share resources. And I hope I described that right if George is listening.
He probably is. And I believe he did a fine job. Fine job.
Bill also did a fine job, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Great job. Thank you for giving us some time here because this was an issue. We were getting some questions about that in terms of what does the future hold for privatization of utilities and where not only that, but where it stands now. So we here at the Water Online Show really appreciate your time and giving us some of your expertise and some of your thoughts based on your long history in the market. So, Bill, thank you very much.
Appreciate it, Bill.
Thanks. Pleasure.
And for all of you, thank you once again for spending some of your day here with us, whether you're viewing us or listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. We appreciate it. I say for Kevin and I, we can't wait to have you back. We can't wait to spend more time with you on our next episode. Until then, we will see you later.